So I'm going to do problem 8 for you guys, and I'm going to do a couple other example problems. And I want to show you another step that you can add in that will actually help you out with finding these answers. So we're going to use the calculator again. We're going to use y equals. So we're going to go, and in y1, we're going to type in whatever, every time it will be a, which is the number in front of x squared, so whatever this number is, times c. So the number in front of x squared in this problem is a 1. So it's going to be 1 times 39 divided by x. So it's always a times c divided by x, which is what we did last time. But then we're going to add in a second level, and we're going to do y2, and we want to type in whatever b is, which in this case is negative 16. So we're going to do negative 16 minus x. And every time, without fail, it will always be in y1 divided by x and in y2 minus x. So the only thing that changes every time is these other numbers. So it'll be a 1 and a 39 because that's what a and c were. And then it will also be it'll be negative 16 in this case because that's what b was. So I'm going to show you how to do this in the calculator, what we're going to do. So we're going to go to y equals, and in y1 I want to type in 1 times 39 divided by x, and in y2 I want to type in negative 16 minus x. So once we get both of those in y equals, we're still going to go look at our table, so second in graph, but this time what we're looking for in our table is it's going to give us a little bit different things. So we have a table where it has, instead of just x and y, it has x, y1, and y2. And what we're looking for is where y1 and y2 are exactly the same. So I'm going to scroll around for a second, and still, if you see negatives in your problem, like here I have negatives. So what that means is I need to look at my negative numbers. So I'm going to go to my negatives, and again, I'm looking for where y1 and y2 are exactly the same, and notice that's right here, negative 3, negative 13, and negative 13. So I'm going to write those numbers down, negative 3, negative 13, and negative 13. So recall, I'm going to write my original problem again, which was j squared minus 16j plus 39. Well, what I'm going to do now is, rather than having to do a lot of work in the table to figure out how to rewrite this, whatever these numbers were that we just came up with, this negative 3 and this negative 13, that's how I can rewrite this problem. So instead of j squared minus 16j, I can write it as minus 3j minus 13j plus 39. And this minus 3 and this minus 13 are from, this minus 3 and this minus 13 are from this minus 3 and this minus 13 that was in my table where they were the same. Well, now it's like all the other problems we did, so we just took a step out. We used the calculator to help us just a little bit more, which was a lot better for us. And what we can do now is we can break these pieces down. So j squared will be j times j, and then minus 3j, because I can't break that down, and I'm going to have minus 13j, I can't break that down, but 39 is 13 times 3. So I'm looking at these two pieces right here, j times j minus 3j. Notice they both have a j in there, so I'm going to take that out, and I'm left with j minus 3, and then I'm going to bring down this sign, always, minus, and then I look at my next two pieces, and these two pieces, my 13j and my plus 13 times 3, both have a 13 in there. So if I take that 13 out, I'm left with j. Because I put a minus on the inside, I've got to change the sign on the inside. It was supposed to be plus. I'm going to make it minus 3. And I know I did this problem correctly because when I look at my parentheses, notice that they're both j minus 3. So that means my problem is done correctly. So my first answer is going to be j minus 3, and my second half of my answer is going to be j minus 13. And remember that minus 13 comes from what was in front of our parentheses to begin with. So we had in front of the first one a j and the second one a minus 13. That's where this j minus 13 came from. And the j minus 3 was from this parentheses here, what was in those. So I'm going to do the same thing with problem 11. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to write in y equals. So in y equals, the first thing I'm going to write, it's always in y1, it is always a times c divided by x, and in y2, it is always b minus x. So y1 is going to be 7 times negative 4 divided by x, because a was 7 and b was negative 4. I'm sorry, c was negative 4. And then in y2, let's try that again with a different marker. And then in y2, I'm going to put negative 12 minus x. And I use negative 12 because b was negative 12. That's where this comes from. And then I want to go look at my table. So remember, in my table, I have x, y1, and y2. And I'm looking for where y1 and y2 are exactly the same. So here's a screenshot of what I've typed in y equals. So in y1, notice I have 7 minus 4 divided by x, and in y2 I have negative 12 minus x. And then make sure you want to press second and graph. You want to go look at your table. And here's a picture of my table of what I'm looking at and when I go look at it. And remember, I am looking for wherever y1 and y2 and y2 are exactly the same. Well, if you'll notice, you actually see that right here at this line. Make that a little darker so you can see what I'm highlighting. This line right here is where they're the same, and those numbers are positive 2, negative 14, and negative 14. So I'm going to use this positive 2 and this negative 14 to rewrite my problem. So originally my problem was 7t squared minus 12t minus 4. And I'm going to bring down my 7t squared. But instead of negative 12 minus 12t, I'm going to write positive 2t minus 14t. And this positive 2 and this negative 14 came from over here where I had the positive 2 and the negative 14 in my table. And then I'm still going to bring down my minus 4. So I'm going to break this problem down. So 7t squared is going to be 7 and then 2t's plus 2t, because I can't break that down. And 14 is going to be 7 times 2t, and then minus 4 is 2 times 2. So again, I'm looking for what they have in common. I'm going to group them together. So I want to look at these two pieces first. Well, they both have a t in there. So I take that t out, and I'm left with 7t plus 2. And then I'm going to bring down this minus sign, because I always bring down whatever sign's there in the middle. And I look at this next grouping. So 7 times 2t minus 2 times 2. Well, they both have a 2 in there. So if I take out that 2, I'm left with 7t. And because I put a minus sign on the outside, I have to change the sign on the inside. So it's going to become a plus and then 2. And I know I did my problem correctly because when I look at it and I look at my parentheses, notice that my two parentheses are exactly the same. They're both 7t plus 2. So that tells me that my first answer is 7t plus 2 because that's what was in the parentheses. And then it also tells me that my second answer is t minus 2. And the reason that's my second answer is because that is what was in front of the parentheses. T and minus 2, that's where that comes from. Lastly, I'm going to do problem 18, I'm sorry. So I'm going to go to y1. And in y1, I want to type in 4 times negative 3 divided by x, because I always do a, whatever a is, times c. So a times c divided by x. And then in y2, I'm going to put negative 1 minus x. Where that negative 1 comes from is in front of this a. There is an imaginary 1 there. And the way that y2 works is I always put whatever b is minus x. So that's where that number comes from. And then I'm going to put those in y equals, and I want to go look at my table. So I have x, y1, and y2. And remember, I am looking for where these two are the same. So here's what my calculator is going to look like when I put this in y equals. I have 4 times negative 3 divided by x and negative 1 minus x. So here's what my table looks like. And again, I'm looking for where y1 and y2 are the same. And if you'll notice, they are the same up here at -4, 3, and 3. So I'm going to be using my -4 and my +3 to help me with my factorization. So I'm going to rewrite my problem, which was 4a squared minus a minus 3. But when I rewrite it, I'm going to write it the second time with minus 4a plus 3a minus 3. And that minus 4 and that plus 3 are the same minus 4 and plus 3 that showed up in our table where they were the same. So now I'm going to break down my problem here. Instead of 4a, it's going to be 2 times 2 and then AA minus 4, which is also 2 times 2a, plus I can't break down 3a or 3. So I'm going to group my pieces together. So I have this group first, and I'm looking for what's the same in both of them. Well, they both have 2 times 2 in there. And remember, 2 times 2 is actually 4. And they both have a in it. So I'm going to take out 2 2's and an a. And I'm left with a minus. Now, anytime I get rid of everything there, I have to put a 1 as a placeholder. And then I'm going to I'm going to bring down my sign. So bring down this plus sign. And then I'm going to group my other two parts. And both of these, 3a minus 3, both have a 3 in there. So if I take out that 3, I'm left with a minus. Then again, I got rid of everything here, so I'm going to put a 1 there as a placeholder. And I know I did my problem correctly because when I look at it, notice my parentheses are exactly the same. So that tells me the first half of my answer is a minus 1, and that comes from what's inside the parentheses. And then the second half of my answer is going to be 4a plus 3. And that 4a plus 3 comes from what is in front of the parentheses. The 4a and the plus 3 there is where that 4a plus 3 comes from. So that would be my answer.